Good morning, everyone.
Good
Good
morning.
morning, everybody.
We're learning Mishnah Shabbos, Perek Chaf, chapter 20, Mishnah Beis, Mishnah 2. I dedicate this morning's learning in memory of my mother, Mrs. Shlomis Rabinowitz, Shlomis Bas Rav Yaakov Eliezer. Okay, so in the previous Mishnah, we learned that the Chachamim did not permit you to strain wine on Shabbos. Even if the strainer was already put on top of the container from before Shabbos, you cannot strain the wine from sediment on Shabbos. So now we're going to have some cases that are similar that the Chachamim actually permit you to do on Shabbos. So Mishnah Beis begins, Naisnin mayim al gabe hashemarim mishvel sheyitzalo. You may pour water over wine sediment that was left in a strainer before Shabbos, so that the sediments should drain from the wine absorbed in them. Okay, so let's just get the case. You're not straining wine that has sediment. There's already sediment sitting in the strainer from before Shabbos. And on Shabbos, you're adding water to the sediment so that the water should basically absorb any wine that's left in the sediment, and then it goes through the strainer to the bottom. So the Mishnah says you are permitted to do that. Now let's take this. Let's figure this out. Let's work this out. So you went ahead. The first step is that's mentioned here is that the water that you put into the sediment and that lands up going through mixed with wine, eventually through the strainer into the container. It's not like that water ever needed straining. It was regular water. And that got mixed with wine. Still fine. It's still good. From the point of the water that you put in, nothing's being strained. In yesterday's case, the wine itself going through the strainer is being strained. Here, the water that's going through is not being strained. There's nothing wrong with the water before, and now mixed with wine, it's fine. So from the water's point, there's no straining being done. The obvious question is, but what about the wine that you're extracting from the sediment? And you are trying to get that to mix with the water, go through the strainer, and leave the sediment behind. That would seemingly be a classic case of Baira. Okay, so the explanation that's given is like this. The malach of selecting involves, now listen carefully to this. The malach of selecting involves the separation of a mixture into distinct items. In this case, this has not occurred, for the wine extracted from the sediments does not drain alone, but as a minority ingredient of the water of which it is now a part of. So basically, the point is that when you are doing Baira, you're selecting, what you're trying to do is you're trying to basically create two distinct items, right? Trying to separate one thing from the other. It's distinct items. Here, what do we want to say? We want to say, well, you're straining the wine out of the sediment. But we're saying the wine is not something that stands by itself. It mixes with the water as a minority ingredient. So in essence, I don't really see, right? I don't really have I don't give so much significance to the wine being strained out. It's water going in and it's Kool-Aid going out. You know, it's water that's been flavored with wine coming out. So although the wine was extracted from the sediment, and I want the wine, I don't want the sediment, but nonetheless, what I'm extracting out, which is the wine, isn't something standing on itself. It's just part of the water.
So the water is never part of the mixture? Is that what it is?
The water is never part of the mixture. The water doesn't have any problems.
Yeah, so it's not part of the mixture.
So to speak, yeah.
Okay.
The water is just kind of, now again, you could definitely say the water at some point is mixing with the sediment, but again, it's not, I'm not trying to strain the water. The water is just going in and coming out.
Well, the important point is whether it's a part of the mixture. If it's part of the mixture, you got to...
So it's not part of the mixture because, now again, it depends what you call being part of the mixture. You know, it depends how you define that. It's definitely going to mix together with the sediment. But the point is that it's not really about separating the water from the sediment. I think that's the way to look at it. Okay, now, so that's the first part. The next part. Umesaninin es hayayin besudarin bekfifa mitzris. Now here, we're talking about straining wine. But we're talking about straining wine from what seems to be, they call it like this. We may filter drinkable wine. That's a very important word. In the case before, the sediment and the wine was not drinkable. Here we're talking about drinkable wine, but it's got these, they call them undesired whitish particles that collect in the wine. So the wine is drinkable. It's got these particles, these white particles in them that most people don't really want in their wine. Okay, the wine is drinkable, right? It's drinkable. No one's going to say it's not drinkable, but there is a preference amongst many people not to have this white stuff in it. So we're saying that you can do on Shabbos. You can actually strain it on Shabbos, but you have to do it through sudarin, which means through cloths, ubekfifa misritz, or through a basket made from palm twigs. Okay, so you're pouring this wine, drinkable wine, with the white particles that most people don't care for, but again, it's drinkable, and you're straining it not through a strainer, but either through a cloth, right? It goes through the cloth, or through this wicker basket, through this palm twigs basket. Now, what's happening here is like this. Okay, let me read to you what they say here in the notes. However, wine that cannot be drunk unfiltered may not be filtered even in unusual fashion. On the other hand, wine containing very few impurities, which most people drink unfiltered, may be filtered. What's happening is like this. Being that you can drink this wine, the wine is drinkable, everybody agrees it's drinkable. It's not like sediment in wine. Sediment in wine is not drinkable. But this is drinkable. So therefore, from a Torah point, this is not boirer. Because it's not like, we don't really look at those white pieces in them as psilus, as waste, as garbage. It's drinkable. People would drink it. So essentially, it's not waste. Nonetheless, being that people do want it out, the Chachamim say if you're going to strain it on Shabbos, you have to do it in an unusual manner, right? You don't typically strain through a cloth. You strain through a strainer. You don't typically strain through a basket. And therefore, the Chachamim said, even though midaraisa, this is not considered boirer, but if you're going to do it on Shabbos, we want you to do it in an unusual way. So it should be clear. So it should be clear that, not to confuse this with other kind of situations. It should be different than your regular boirer. That you should do it in an unusual fashion, and then you'll be allowed to do it. So that's what it means that you can strain the wine with cloth or with this with this basket. Because essentially it's not boirer because it's drinkable. Nonetheless, being that most people want it out, therefore the Chachamim say you can strain it, but you got to do it in an unusual manner. Don't do it in a regular boirer manner. So now on the bottom they add, so again, if the wine is not drinkable like by sediment, doing it through the cloth, doing it through the basket, doing it in an unusual manner doesn't help you. And if we're talking about where there's very few white pieces, and therefore most people would drink it unfiltered, then they bring down here, you can even filter it through a strainer. That's very interesting. Now, one last thing about this. In the case of straining it through a cloth, typically the halacha is you're not allowed to wet cloth on Shabbos because we're concerned that you're going to wring it out. You're going to squeeze it out. Right. And that you can't do on Shabbos. In this case, now you're telling me, take a cloth and pour the wine through it. Aren't you concerned you're going to try to wring it out? And the answer is, interestingly here, that although we're calling the cloth unusual, but they say the Mishna here speaks of a cloth designated for filtering wine. Since it's designated for this purpose, we're not concerned that one may wring out the wet cloth since it does not care if it remains wet. Meaning a regular cloth, you have a regular piece of garment, right? Mm-hmm. And you're going to get it wet, and somehow we're afraid you're going to wring it out. But something that we're not concerned you're going to wring out, it's not a problem getting wet. And therefore, in this case where, again, interestingly, the cloth was made for filtering the wine, and that's why we say we're not afraid you're gonna wring it out because you don't care if it's wet. But still, this was called unusual or unusual enough to be able to say that you could go ahead and strain this wine. That midaraisa really isn't a problem of boirer. All right, Mishna continues. You can crack a raw egg into a mustard strainer. Now, this mustard strainer has mustard seeds in it, okay? And what they used to do in order to improve the appearance of the mustard seeds that are in the container, they would crack an egg over it. Anything dark seemingly was able to get a brighter appearance if you put a egg yolk onto it, okay? Okay. So it gave it a brighter look. So what are you doing? You are now putting the egg through into a mustard strainer. Now what's going to happen? You're going to crack the egg over the mustard strainer. The yolk is going to stay with the mustard seeds, and the white is going to go through.
Mm-hmm.
Or is it the other way around?
Probably the yolk would stay with it unless it.
Although the thinner yolk drain. I'm sorry. I know. Wait, I make a mistake. Hold on. Although the thinner yolk drains through the strainer and drips into the mustard below, so it's not that the mustard is in the strainer. It's a mustard strainer. Okay, meaning you're using it for mustard. The mustard's below in a container. You got a strainer above. You put the egg through it. The yolk goes through. The white stays on. And when the yolk goes in, that's what you use now for it to go ahead and to brighten the mustard seeds. Okay, so therefore, what's happening is like this. So you've got the strainer. The strainer is separating the yolk from the white. So doesn't that sound like butter? Aren't you separating it? So they say like this. Selecting involves separating food from waste matter. Separating one food from another is generally forbidden only because the food the person chooses to eat now is considered food, while the food he chooses not to eat is considered waste. That's how we look at everything. Mm-hmm. Now, in the Mishna's case, the person not separating the yolk from the egg white because he wishes to eat the yolk, because he wishes to use the yolk as a coloring. Since he is not choosing to eat the yolk and leave the egg white, both items are considered food, and separating them is not considered selecting food from waste. I'm not trying to eat the egg yolk to say that I want it separate from the white. For that, yeah, I want it separate from the white. That I do, because I don't want the white on the mustard seeds. I want the yolk on the mustard seeds. But I'm not separating the yolk for the purpose of eating it. I'm not separating the yolk from the white because I want to eat the yolk. I'm separating the yolk from the white because I want to color with it. It's not because I want to hold on to it. And therefore, I don't have this distinction about one is food and one is waste. Mm-hmm. They're both desirable. Okay, they're both. That's why I seem to be saying it. Since he's not choosing it, if I wanted to eat the right, since he's not choosing it for eating the yolk separate from the white, therefore they're both considered food. They're both considered the same status. They're not different to say that now I select. It's considered selecting one from the other. Of course, physically you're selecting one from the other, but for the purpose of Beira on Shabbos to be considered the act on Shabbos, this kind of separating doesn't fall under the malacha of Beira. Okay. Last case. You can make something called anamelon. Okay, anamelon. It's not a type of melon. Okay, what it is a mixture of wine, honey, and pepper. Pepper. That's what it says. Okay, and you can make it on Shabbos. Why not? So the explanation is that though making this beverage, for some reason, involves a considerable amount of work and expertise, you can't just mix it, you got to know how to mix it. Mm-hmm. It is not, nonetheless, it is not considered excessive and professional toil that is generally forbidden on Shabbos, right? We have certain things that are not per se forbidden, but because they involve excessive work, or what's called professional work, so that takes away from, that's too much of a weekday activity, and therefore the sages forbade it. The Tanakama is saying that this drink does not have that problem. Although there is a certain amount of work involved and a certain amount of professionalism involved, it's not at the level that the Chachamim forbade it, and therefore you can make it on Shabbos. Rabbi Yehuda says, B'Shabbos b'kais, he qualifies. If you're doing it on Shabbos, you can only make a cup at a time. Because you make a cupful, because it is considered excessive work and it is considered professional, and therefore it's not going to be forbidden, but it's going to be limited. So on Shabbos, you do a cupful at a time. The Yom Tiv, on Yom Tiv, where things are more lenient when it comes to food preparation, but again, it's still excessive. It's still a professional act. Belugin, you do it by lug. Lug means a jugful. No, a bottleful, they call it. Okay, a bottle at a time. Uvamayed and a chalamayed, which is even more lenient, but Shabbos, you can do a barrel at a time. But the point is that you have to do it in a sort of limited fashion, according to Rabbi Yehuda. Mm-hmm. Rabbi Tzadok says, depends on your guests. Depends on what you need. Doesn't make a difference what day it is. It could be Shabbos, it could be Yom Tov, it could be Chalamayid. you cannot just make as much as you want, and you don't make, and it's not dependent on what the quantity that you're making at each time is. It all depends on how much you need it for. If you have lots of guests, you can make lots of it. If you have very few guests, you make very few. You have only yourself, you make only for yourself. It's all dependent on the consumption. So 3 opinions. The first opinion is make it. Make as much as you want. The second opinion is got to make it based on, depending on the day, only by a certain quantity. And according to Tzaddik, no makes a difference what day it is. And you can't just make as much as you want. It all depends on how many guests, how many people you need it for. And the law is like the Tanakama, you can make as much as you want, even on Shabbos. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi.
I was about to say, and everybody.